In the unsanctified darkness of the 41st millennium, the Imperium of Man is a monument built on a foundation of 10,000 years of lies. The greatest and most necessary of these lies is the nobility of sacrifice. From the moment of birth, its citizens are taught that a life given in service to the God Emperor is a life of supreme purpose. They are told that to die for the Golden Throne is to earn a place in eternity, that a body broken on the field of battle is a prayer made manifest in blood and bone. But this is a catechism for the masses, a comforting fable whispered in the vastness between the screaming stars to hold back a truth so obscene it would shatter the sanity of a galaxy. The truth is that the Imperium, in its desperate, agonal struggle for survival, has plumbed depths of depravity that would make the heretic and the Xenos recoil. It has sanctioned acts of such profound, calculated evil, all under the guise of the greater good, that the very line between damnation and salvation has been scoured away to nothing by the tears of 1 trillion forgotten souls. There are sacrifices that do not lead to martyrdom, but to an eternity of conscious torment. There are weapons forged not of blessed adamantium or holy steel, but of screaming, violated minds and the raw essence of impossibility. And there is a fate, reserved not for the great or the wicked, but for the unremarkable, the unlucky, and the insignificant, that is so far beyond the simple mercy of death, the word itself becomes a prayer. This is the story of that fate, an anatomy of a weapon born from ultimate sin, a journey into the heart of a cage made of flesh and faith. This is the horrifying life of a Daemonhost. Our story does not begin on a blood-soaked battlefield, nor in the shadowed conspiratorial councils of the Inquisition. It begins, as all the most profound tragedies of the Imperium do, in the soul-crushing anonymity of institutionalized obscurity. It begins with a man named Kaelin Vaughn on the hive world of Thraxus Prime. Imagine Thraxus Prime. Do not picture a planet. Picture a disease of industry given planetary form. From the silent void of space, it is a grey, cancerous orb, its surface perpetually hidden beneath a shroud of chemical smog and the exhaust plumes of continent-spanning manufactorums. It is a world that has forgotten the touch of natural sunlight, a world that has choked on its own progress for 5 millennia. On its surface, geography has been replaced by architecture. Hive spires, artificial mountains of plasteel, rockcrete and recycled bone claw their way into the acidic clouds, each one a nation-state unto itself, a vertical empire housing untold billions of souls. The highest levels, the needle-like spires, breach the toxic cloud layer, affording the noble houses a glimpse of the stars and air that doesn't need to be scrubbed of poison. Down below, in the sunless, violent abyss of the underhive, life is a currency spent in moments, a desperate scramble for survival in the polluted darkness. Kaelin Vaughn did not live in these extremes. He existed, as the overwhelming mass of humanity does, in the crushing, pressurized mediocrity of the mid-hive. His world was Sector Gamma 7, Level 212 of Hive Primus. To exist here was to live in a state of perpetual artificial twilight. The ceiling, a kilometer above, was a latticework of conduits and support structures, from which hung sputtering, ancient lumen globes that cast a jaundiced, flickering light on the ceaseless activity below. The air in the mid-hive was a flavor, a thick metallic soup that coated the back of the throat. It was a cocktail of recycled oxygen, the sharp tang of ozone from failing power relays, the distant fumes of promethium from the transit levels, and the ever-present cloying sweetness of the corpse starch processing plants that churned the hive's dead back into tasteless nutrient paste. The sound was the hive's true heartbeat, a constant industrial thrum that vibrated through the very soles of your feet. It was a bass note of mega-scale machinery, the roar of continent-sized ventilation fans, and the distant percussive clang of the forges, a symphony of labor so pervasive that true silence was a terrifying alien concept, a harbinger of catastrophe. Kaelin was a Lex mechanic, a Class Delta scribe in the labyrinthine bureaucracy of the Adeptus Administratum. His post was within the dusty, cavernous halls of the Hall of Tithes and Measures, a place where the lives, deaths, and labors of entire star systems were reduced to cold, impartial figures on data slates and parchment scrolls. For 20 years, his life had been a repeating decimal of unwavering routine. He would wake in his cramped, coffin-like hab cubicle to the chime of the sector-wide chronometer. He would consume his morning ration of grey, gritty nutrient paste. He would join the great slow-moving river of humanity in the transit corridors, a grey tide of workers in grey uniforms flowing towards their designated stations, their faces blank with the resignation of cogs in a machine they could not comprehend. His work was his religion. While others paid lip service to the imperial creed, Kaelin's faith was enacted in the meticulous precision of his duties. He collated grain tithes from the verdant agri-worlds of the Drusus marches. He tracked the shipment of munitions to beleaguered Cadian remnants, the allocation of sacred unguents to the Adeptus Mechanicus, the census data of feral worlds whose inhabitants had never seen a starship. Each scratch of his auto-quill, each tap on the worn keys of his cogitator, was an act of profound faith. He truly believed his thankless, monotonous labor was a prayer, a single vital stone in the great wall of order that held back the screaming chaos of the galaxy. He was precise, he was diligent, he was utterly, completely, and reassuringly invisible. And this invisibility, this perfect, unassuming loyalty, was the very flaw in his soul that would condemn him to a fate worse than any heretic. The change, when it came, began not with a klaxon or a tremor, but with a subtle wrongness, a discordant note in the grand grinding symphony of the hive. A rumor passed in hushed tones between scriptorium desks and during the brief moments of nutrient break slithered through the administratum. A black ship, one of the silent, dreaded vessels of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, had been diverted to Thraxus Prime, an unscheduled, undocumented arrival. In a bureaucracy where an unsanctioned shipment of parchment could trigger a decade-long investigation, such a deviation was an omen of the highest magnitude. Days later, the grey-clad figures appeared. They were men and women with the flat, dead eyes of professional killers and the quiet, predatory stillness of apex predators. They were not Arbites, whose presence was a familiar form of brutal oppression. They were not local enforcers. They moved through the administratum halls with an unspoken authority that made even high-ranking prefects avert their gaze and step aside. They were throne agents, the faceless enforcers of some higher, more terrifying power. They sealed off entire sectors of the archives, their faces impassive masks, as they displaced centuries of ordered bureaucracy with cold, efficient finality. Fear, a novel and deeply unwelcome sensation, began to seep through the stonework of the Hall of Tithes. Scribes who had spent their entire lives in the predictable comfort of their stations now cast nervous glances over their shoulders. The rhythmic scratching of quills became hesitant. The low hum of cogitators seemed to tremble. The air, already thick with the dust of ages, grew heavy with unspoken, terrified questions. Then he arrived. The great plasteel doors to the Hall of Tithes, doors that were ceremonially sealed and only opened on centennial holy days, ground open with a sound like tearing rock. The industrial hum of the chamber faltered and died, the very machinery of the hive seeming to hold its breath. A new sound replaced it, the heavy rhythmic tread of ceramite boots on stone. 2 squads of Kasserkin, the elite shock troopers of Cadia, marched into the hall. Their presence was a physical shock, a violent intrusion of war into a world of paper. Their carapace armor was midnight black, unmarked by regimental heraldry, their hellguns held at a low, ready stance. Their disciplined, lethal aura radiated a cold promise of violence. The scribes, Kaelin included, fell from their stools as one, prostrating themselves, their faces pressed to the cold, grimy floor. This was not a posture of respect. It was the instinctive reaction of prey in the presence of a hunter. Between the 2 squads of soldiers walked a man who was the apotheosis of absolute power. He was ancient, his age impossible to guess, etched not in wrinkles but in a terrifying, ageless weariness. His face was a stern, cruel sculpture of pale flesh pulled taut over a framework of sharp bone. His head was shaved, revealing a complex network of silver psychoconductive conduits that snaked across his scalp and pulsed with a faint inner light. One of his eyes was a cold human grey, weary with the weight of seeing 1,000 worlds burn. The other was a masterpiece of the Adeptus Mechanicus, a multi-lensed augmetic of brass and crystal that whirred and clicked with near-silent precision, its cold azure light sweeping across the room, analyzing, dissecting, judging every soul it passed over. He wore a suit of artificer power armor, its black ceramite plates intricately etched with scriptures of warding and sigils of authority that seemed to writhe in the peripheral vision. A long crimson coat, trimmed with the white fur of some extinct Terran predator, fell over his shoulders. From his belt hung a sheathed force sword and a holstered bolt pistol of such ornate design it was clearly a relic from a forgotten age. On his right pauldron was the symbol that drained the last vestiges of blood from every face in the room. Two skulls, stark and severe, surrounded by the single damning letter I, the sigil of the Holy Ordos of the Emperor's Inquisition,